Frankie,
Ian,
how's it going, buddy?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm fantastic, man. I am excited to talk about crappy career advice. How about yourself?
Not only am I excited to talk about crappy career advice, we've been getting a little bit of flack from some of our loyal listeners. And one of the things is, I guess one of our podcasts was accidentally posted. It was one of our early ones. We didn't know what we were doing from an editing standpoint, and I had to get up and pee, and it wasn't initially edited out, even though it was posted. So just an FYI, I just left the bathroom and I peed so hard I almost made myself shit. I conjured pee up from some of the deep recesses in my body.
So, good career advice for Frank is before we record, every time I make him get up like a 6-year-old, like before you make every little kid go to pee before they go to bed, we have to make Frank go to the potty before every single one. Because if I don't do that, at around 35 minutes of every podcast, Frank will get up in the middle and go pee.
We have to clap and give it to the editor and have him cut it out. We missed one. It's kind of like my son who's 2 and potty training, and it's 43 years of progress hasn't really changed much between me and my 2-year-old.
We picked a bad day to have a record day of downloads. We had 113 downloads yesterday morning, and it happened to be the one time we put a podcast up of Frank getting up and peeing and then saying he dribbled on himself when he when he got back. So I'm sure it was very riveting for all of you listeners that were listening to the 2.5 minutes of dead quiet while Frank said, "I got to go to the bathroom." But it wasn't like Frank Drebin in Naked Gun, at least, where Frank didn't bring the actual microphone into the toilet, which would have been that would have been some real Emmy-winning kind of stuff right there.
It's going to give us content to strive for, Ian. Me
Yes.
accidentally in the bathroom with the mic on.
Yes. So this episode, we could probably do a 5-part series of this. This is bad career advice that is commonly given and accepted. And we are going to talk about 10 of our favorite bad career advice that you would get. But before we do that, Frank, let's start with some good advice. Why don't you tell everyone the advice that you give every intern that comes to Cava companies?
So currently it's 2 nuggets of gold.
But it's kind of one sentence.
It's one sentence. I'm thinking about adding a third bullet, but for the time being, it's this. So this is usually for interns, and we're in our 11th year of business, 12th year of business. We've had an intern nearly every summer. So like pandemic summer, we didn't have one, but every other summer we always have an intern, and they're just great kids. They're fun. They're full of energy. It's just fun. So by the end of the summer, I'm kind of like the crazy uncle because I own the business. I'm running around. As we get bigger, they see less and less of me, but I always meet them for the interview. I always meet them on their first day, and I always talk to them on their last day at a minimum, but I usually see them more. And my 2 pieces of advice for every intern are this. First, I say, is it okay if I give you a couple of pieces of advice? And they're like, yeah, sure, of course, that'd be great. I'm like, all right, number 1, buy hard assets. And then sometimes there's a conversation there, but buy a house, buy stock, buy gold, whatever, but invest in real things. Don't buy a car, like buy things that are real, that are going to have tangible value for you because they can set you apart. And this has worked really well for Ian and me. And I'm like, and piece of advice number 2 is don't get fat. And they usually look at me because they're 22 or 21 years old, and they kind of are like in shock. I'm like, yeah, I mean, it never goes back the same once that happens.
So we start with a couple of nuggets for our loyal listeners. Buy hard assets, don't get fat. Those are words to live by Frank Cava.
Great advice.
Beautiful. So I don't know where a lot of this advice that we're going to talk about today originated from. And I think it's going to be interesting to break each of these down a little bit and try to see the psychology behind why. And it's typically a manager that would give you this kind of advice, but the psychology behind why they give that advice. And it's interesting because a lot of the time that advice is based on how they would do things, or it's advice based on really mistakes or insecurities that they might have. But number 1 on our list, which is annoying as hell to both Frank and I, and we didn't follow this, was follow your passion. I think that's when we came through with our list, we both spit that out right out of the gate, that we just absolutely disdain this advice that people give people early in their career, because I think it sets a lot of people back in their career early, especially from an income perspective, because, what the hell does that even mean? And is passion even profitable? And it's so generic and opaque that I see it being counterproductive really to someone's career.
It's funny because there's a comedian who says something like this, and not all advice is created equal. And I think as you're younger, just because someone's older or in a position of strength or is in, a leadership position, you kind of put them on a pedestal and you think you should listen to what they say. And the comedian, loosely translated, says something along the lines of this: you think that your dad is special as a young kid. Like, you think he's a superhero, he has these incredible qualities. And then you realize as you get older that the only thing your dad really was capable of doing is getting your mother pregnant. And you you go from superhero to he just put his penis somewhere and boom. Like you couldn't get from more opposite ends of the spectrum. And I think that's really important when you pick who you take advice from. You need to realize, does this person deserve to have your ear or do they not? And people who will give you the follow your passion advice are usually not people who have much money. Now, I'm married to a liberal professor. A lot of her friends followed their passions. They live, at the median salary, and they're very, very, very happy. For those of you that are listening to a business related podcast, it's probably not where happiness lies for you. So you have to understand who's giving you the advice. What does it mean to you? And following your passion does not usually lead to a life of riches or a life of freedom from the standpoint of being, having to live to a budget.
When you think about your career, and you might have gone closer to your passion though than I did, at least out of the gate. You are passionate about construction. You chose construction as a degree because it was interesting, not necessarily because it would give you the highest salary out of college or the best opportunities. You did it because you were pretty passionate about it. So in one stance, we're saying, that's dumb, but you did sort of start with a passion.
So there was a period in my life where I went to Virginia Tech to recruit, and one of the professors there, I don't know if he's credited with this or who else, and maybe we need to put this in the half-assed internet research department, but there was a quote loosely translated of, find something you love and you'll never work a day in your life. So people who are passionate, usually you meet them on Saturday at the farmer's market, and they grow incredible mushrooms that you can put into a sauce, or they make beautiful scarves. People who are professional usually don't have an incredible amount of, it's not their passion. Their passion's snowboarding, but they're also really good at real estate. For me, I followed something I was good at. I've talked before about how I started off wanting to be a doctor or a lawyer, and I realized I'm not smart enough and I don't understand chemistry. I'm just not built to be those things. And I retreated to construction. Construction was a comfort zone that I knew. And what I was honest with myself about at 21 or 22 was, I'm good at these things. I understand these things. I can distinguish myself here. I wasn't necessarily in love with those things, but I was good at it. And as I grew up, as I got better at it, I became more passionate about it. Because if you've ever heard me talk about my business, it seems like a passion, but it's not the thing. It's not the things that I'm the most passionate about in my life, but it's kind of become part of my life.
Well, and I think, look, you going out in the East End and walking around an old brick house that's 100 years old and trying to figure out how to go flip it and fix it. And I don't know that that's the most passionate thing in your life. You're good at it. You know how to do it. I think it's kind of mundane now for you. I think your passion though is growing something big, building a team, building a culture, having fun, having a fun culture where people enjoy being at work. So it's not so much the construct of what you're selling, the product. It's not, your business, you sell out cards, you find leads, you buy low, you sell high. Similar to Jenny's dad, Chief, he's almost the same thing. I don't know that he's the most passionate guy about trailers, but I think he likes running a business that's profitable, and he likes the chase. He likes the challenge of finding ways to make, unique, different ways of profit. So I think the business side of it, the commercial aspect of your business is more exciting than what you're actually selling.
So this might come out a little wonky or a little stilted because I didn't prep it. I didn't think about it before, but you just said something that made me think of it. So I might stumble a bit, but what I think happens for people who are passionate about, if someone says that person's passionate about business, what typically happens is that person lines up with something or does something career-wise that fits them. And then they put in a body of work, years. We're talking 2 decades here for Ian and me, and we both plan to live to be old men. And this is what I'm going to do, right up until the minute I die, because I love it. But if you pick something that aligns with you and you pick something that you work really hard at and you focus on it, I think it can become your passion and it becomes a part of you. But then what happens is it morphs. Like for me, the real estate, I love owning real estate, but a house doesn't matter. But what I get to focus on now is I get to iterate. For me, I iterate into building a business, owning a pool of assets, working with people, building careers, watching others succeed. Those are the things I'm passionate about now. As a 20-year-old, I didn't know how to manage people. But as a 40-year-old, I do, and I like to see others succeed. That's what I get fired up about. I don't know what the next couple of decades holds, but I know it's going to go kind of down that trajectory, and I'm going to continue to morph to things that I love. And what Ian and I both are in the middle of is it our number one passion? No. But do we put passionate pursuits into our business? This is a goofy podcast that my attorney thinks is a waste of our time. However, we're doing it because we think there's value in it. It's something we believe in. We have passion about it, and we get to make that choice. And that's what starts to happen if you make the right decisions in your teens, in your 20s, and your 30s. You get to build.
I think you just said something that's important. So take this podcast, for instance. If a 21-year-old asked me, what should I go do? Should I go, looks awesome what you guys are doing. I'd love to do that. I don't know that my advice would be like, well, if you're passionate about it, get into podcasting. That if I said that to them, that would be advice based on where I'm at in my life. That would be advice where you're at in your life. I would not give that advice to a 22-year-old Ian who didn't have a pot to piss in, because there's no money in this for at least for a while. You and I haven't figured out how it's ever going to make money, but I don't know that that's why we're doing it. This kind of is a passion project that could lead to some money or could lead to different marketing opportunities, but we're not doing it for that. This is fun for us. It's kind of a period of our week where we get together, we chop up on something, and something we're putting together. But when I was younger, I got an engineering degree because I was good at math, not because I was passionate about engineering. Not one class interested me. I was just pretty good at it. And I knew that engineering paid as well as anything out of college for getting a job, but I would do my internships and I'd be like, God, this is awful. This is awful. I'm at this drafting desk. I'm drafting parts on components for automobiles. But one thing I did see is I watched the sales guys coming in and out, and they would go sell the products that I was drafting. And that looked exciting to me. So I decided I'm gonna be a sales engineer. So if I'm gonna be an engineer, I want to get into sales. And I was passionate about that. I did get energized by figuring out how to prospect, how to find and get new customers, how to convince someone from a no to a yes. I'm passionate about that. I'm passionate about growing a business. And then I got an opportunity to manage people. And I found I was passionate about that because it was the closest thing to sports that I could find. It was, it was the closest thing to being a coach, or, how do I go and build a team, develop the team and make it a winning team, make us better. And I sold at GE, I sold variable frequency drives and excitation systems for generators and turbines and power plants. I could care less about that product. I didn't really even know how it worked. I was just good with people. And then I left to go to a company to run a mortgage business. I could not be it is the most boring ass business it is just a dumb commodity driven business that's filled with awful government regulations. There's nothing about that business that is that enjoyable other than the money. But the part I loved about it was sales. It was customer service. It was how do we acquire more? It was how do we build a better team? Is how do we get that team to go perform a little better? So things I'm really passionate about, which is selling, marketing, building great teams, driving profits. That stuff's fun to me because it's kind of a game. So I didn't really care. I think when people say follow your passion, a lot of people new in their career think that has to do with the product. And I don't know that it has to be the product. I think the context of that could be do things that you enjoy doing. I've always enjoyed sales. I've always enjoyed building teams. I've always enjoyed marketing, and I'm still doing some of that stuff today.
So as we get into this, we're going to talk a little bit about working hard, right? It's going to be a point we talk about in a minute. And what Ian and I talked about when we were laying this out is following your passion can be good advice. It can be bad advice. It's usually not the first piece of advice, or it's not the only piece of advice. It's part of the advice. So if you're coming out of college or thinking of making a career change, if you follow your passion, it doesn't always get you ultimately where you want to go. However, if you get in the door and you prove worth and you prove value and you get people who champion you, and then you find something inside of that business that you do have passion about. Maybe it isn't mortgages, but it's leading or teaching or training. And then you pick that path and that fits within who you are as a person and what your skill sets are. That's where things can go exponentially. But if you're going to be like a basket weaver or someone who does pottery, like that's a commodity that's not going to lead to wealth. It's going to lead to maybe a lot of joy, but that sounds more like a hobby than it sounds like a career.
Well said. Number two, since you already highlighted it, let's go right to work hard. And there are many different ways of saying this, but in general, I think a mentality is the harder you work, the more success you'll have. And the caveat there that people don't talk about is that depends on context.
Very much.
If I went and took a job at the laundromat across the street from me in Vienna here, I'm sure they would give me as many hours as I wanted. I could work around the clock. I could work 16-hour days, 7 days a week, and I'm sure they would give me plenty of hours. And I would never get anywhere in my life. Never. It wouldn't matter how hard I worked. I would not find success. And so I think where you work is something that most people don't give enough thought to. And where I apply my time, my hours, your hours are just so valuable. So why would you work for any company in any industry where long hours would not show a big return?
So where you work is part of it, but the industry you work in. So like if you want to have a career where you get to control things or have some passion about it, it's really hard to do that if you're a dishwasher at a restaurant or if you're working at McDonald's. Like those are not professions or jobs that have a lot of discretion. It's task oriented and you're going to bust your ass. It's physical work. It's like Ian, dad, and my dad are both hands-on guys. Ian's dad was in a steel mill. My dad's an electrician. Like those are hard jobs where you go and you come home from work tired and sweaty, but there's not a lot of area to go outside of that unless you branch into management or something like that. So you have to think about, where am I pointing myself? Like, okay, you have to start at the bottom, but if I start at the bottom is there a place to graduate to, or am I always going to be doing something manual? And if being in the manual side is what you want to do, that's cool. But know that, know that that's the trajectory that you're on.
What our dads did was not scalable.
No.
So over 30 years, my dad will tell you his best income years were the years where he worked double shifts 7 days a week. And he got plenty of holiday double shifts, right? Where you could make 4 times the money. But it was always a ceiling. There was no opportunity to do more. If he got the hours, he worked it, but there's only so many hours you can humanly work before you burn yourself out. And the same with your dad as an electrician. His income is predicated on the hours he can put into different jobs. And, that runs into a ceiling. You can't leverage that.
Work hard is bad advice because, as Ian said, it's capped. Work really hard inside with your head up and looking around every now and again is really smart. And this is kind of an iteration of working hard. Starting to become an arbiter of your time and looking at what am I putting my time into and what do I bill at? So people have asked me this question a ton of times. And Ian and I are spoiled brats. I know that, but we have help in our lives. I have someone who mows the lawn. I have someone who cleans the house. In a lot of instances, I have someone who cooks. And I've gone back and I've done the math on how much money I've spent over the last 10 years on those tasks. And it's not an insignificant amount of money. It's a lot of money. It's more than $100,000. But it came out to about $48 per hour for tasks that I've been able to free up. And what I've been able to do is I've been able to build a rate 5 to 15 times that. And because of that, I could go home and fold the laundry or mow the lawn. Those are hardworking tasks. But those aren't the best uses of my time. I have someone who's great at those things, who does them well. They do it. And what I get to do is I either have free time or I get time to invest into my business or into the things that I'm better at. And that is the difference between just working hard blindly and working hard with maybe some discretion.
Love that. And something you said a second ago, I think it's worth repeating a little bit. It's not just the company. Yes, you want to pick a company that's healthy, that is a leader against its peers, that's one of the top 1 or 2 in its industry, that's consistently growing. Those are the kind of companies where the people are growing within them.
Right.
But I think the market matters a lot. So Frank, when I left General Electric, I was selling to industrials. I was selling to steel mills, paper mills, aluminum companies, autos. Well, what was happening to those companies in the early 2000s? Well, really 80s, 90s, 2000s. They were being killed by manufacturing facilities in China, Vietnam, the Philippines, Mexico. It was being all offshored. And the companies that were still selling, they were getting killed by people on the internet that could just sell it, undercut, do all of that. So when I left General Electric, it wasn't so much leaving a better company for a different company. Some of that was there. I left a much bigger company for a smaller company that could grow faster. But the other piece of it was, when people asked me, I'd say, well, you can't bring houses off a boat from China. You can't get beat by some internet company that started in California. You still have to own the dirt, build the houses. It's a local business and it's growing, and it's just not going anywhere over the next 30 years. It's going to still be a profitable business if you pick the right home builder. Now, at the time, there's 5 builders I could have picked that would have been terrible decisions. Centex is no longer around. They're gone. I could have chosen Beazer, who got terrible management in that company. I could have chose K. Hovnanian. There's a number I could have chose. So it matters that I chose the right builder, but I was really focused on what's a very profitable business that will be for 30 years, that can't be disrupted. That was important to me. So if I'm going to go give my 30s, which is what I did, if I'm going to go give my 30s and work my ass off, which I just know who I am, wherever I went, I was going to work my ass off, wherever I was. If I'd have stayed at GE and given them my 30s, I would have worked my ass off. The difference is I traded GE, which stock price was at $60 when I left at 28 years old. It's 11 today. All of those stock options would have been 0. That's how I was paid in equity. And I traded for a smaller company whose stock was $600-700, and it went up to $3,500 by the time I left. So for me, as an executive that was paid by the performance of the stock, it was a smart move for me to go trade to a smaller company with much better opportunity to grow. And for me, where I was going to work really mattered because I knew I was going to work hard no matter what in my 30s.
So there's a program that I love. It's a training program I saw somewhere in my late 20s or early 30s, and it's called Celebrate What's Right with the World. And it's by a guy by the name of DeWitt Jones. And if you try and find it on the internet, you might be able to pirate it, but you got to buy this. You got to buy it. It's really hard. It's hard to find, but it's awesome. I had my whole team.
Frank, you pirate.
Yeah. But DeWitt Jones says this. He says the difference in good and great is not measured in meters. It's not the difference between good and great is measured in millimeters and not miles. And what that is it's just small tweaks to the dial that make all the difference. Work hard is bad advice. Work hard with discretion, or work hard with an ability to grow or get where you want to get, is great advice. That's the difference in DeWitt Jones's vernacular between a good frame, he's a photographer, and a great frame. And that's the difference. It's work hard with an asterisk.
Love it. Love it. So number 3 is be patient. And
as Ian and I both, as I interrupt him here, we're both incredibly good at being patient. Like, like what are my virtues?
I've ignored this advice at every step of my career. I think what's important more than anything on this, Frank, is let's talk about the reasoning of why a manager would tell you to be patient. What are your thoughts initially when a manager says be patient to you?
I don't want to go have to find someone to replace you, so just stay there for a while.
That's pretty good. Yeah, I think of a manager without any authority, without any power, someone who's saying, just let me punt this down the road, and because I don't have the ability to go get you what you're asking for, whether it's money, if you're asking for money and they say be patient, if you're asking for a promotion and they say be patient, if you're asking for a transfer to a different division, if you're anything, when someone says be patient, it's usually because they can't give you what you want fast enough. Either your company's not growing fast enough, or they just don't have any pull within your company. Or I also think you're saying that because you didn't move fast in your career. So some reason you think I should have to do it the same. You're self-conscious about the fact that your career moves slow, so you're going to ask me to do the same.
And with everything that's inside of this this podcast and this particular episode, there's bad advice and be patient, but there's also a hint of good. You might not be ready. You might not have the skills or the chops to do the next thing. Major League Baseball has 4 rungs of minor league baseball before you can get to the show, because they're going to eat you alive up there. So there is some positive to being patient, but what I can tell you is this. In my life, I always felt internal strife about the speed with which I was moving. I chose to voice it infrequently. And I was kind of like a duck. I was floating along, looking like not much was happening, but inside was the paddle. And I was trying to stay afloat. And it almost feels like angst in your 20s. But again, if you have a bearing point and you kind of look ahead, and if you work at a bigger company, you can find people who took a career arc like you, and you can talk to them. You can say, you don't want to kiss their ass, but at the same time, you can say, I like your arc. What did you do? Why did you move? What were the steps that you took to get here? How can I help you look better so I can get there too? Like little things like that. Like those are what mentors and relationships get you to, that kind of help you understand I can be impatient, but I do need to wait a certain amount of time so I need to be good at the job. But I can be impatient if I do these things and I add these values. And that's what's really important, is if you want to be impatient, add value and figure that part out.
get results, earn it. So if you want to come out of A ball to AAA, you want to move fast.
Get 380.
And you're hitting 220 and your
Right.
coach says be patient. He's not saying be patient. He's saying you suck at hitting. You're not going anywhere. So the reason why I get annoyed with be patient is it's half-ass advice. It's
Right.
a manager not having the guts to say, you want to be a sales manager? Why do you suck at selling? You're ranked 27th out of 32 sales reps and you're asking me to be a sales manager? We're thinking of replacing you. But instead, they take the chicken shit route and they say, be patient. Well, that's not good advice. The good advice is, if you want something, show me you're a producer and I'll have no choice. But you need to force my hand because your results are not doing it.
I'm going to take it to the other side of that, right? So that's everything you said. I completely agree with. But if you're 27 out of 32, like, you're delusional if you're asking to be promoted. Like, you're a jackass.
Yeah.
But let's say you're 5 out of 32, but you've only been in the job for 8 months. I found myself in this position more than once. And what I was told is, correct, you're doing great. However, you sold in 2 communities, all with this loan program. If I move you to a different community and you learn a different sales cycle and you learn a different finance option, you're going to get stronger. That wasn't a bullshit, be patient. That was a really good example of
context.
Frank, if you go to this other community and learn how to sell, you're going to stand out because it's one of our most expensive product offerings. It's a different loan program you're going to be selling. In an interview, you're going to be able to talk about, I sold FHA, I sold super jumbo, and I sold everything in between. And I know how to relate to 5 different customers, not just 1 or 2.
Forget the interview though. Forget the interview. That doesn't matter. That's just politics. What's more important is you're going to be able to manage someone who is selling a $200,000 house and manage another person who's selling $1 million house.
Right.
You look them in the eyes and say, I know your challenges because I've done it.
Yep.
And I know what you're faced with, and I can empathize with you and I can work with you because I wasn't so limited in what I did. So again, the advice is not be patient. The advice is, how do I know it's not luck? You've had a good 8 months. We've had a hell of a good market. The wind's blowing at our back. You happen to be in a really good community that's priced perfectly. Let's try you in a different one. That is advice. That is advice of, I know from my time that your short-term performance might not be, something we could replicate. That's important to be able to give that kind of context. That's advice. Be patient. That's not advice.
I agree.
So number 4, starting salary matters.
Let me start with this one, Ian, because this was my bring. So I remember graduating from college, and I graduated in the late 90s. And back then in my line of work, like, you were going to start in the low 40s, maybe the high 30s. And, you'd have a couple of things in your comp package that would take you up into maybe 43, 45 grand. And that's where you started. And there was a guy who we graduated with that started at 60. So he was nearly 20% higher than all of us. And although at first I was a little bit off put by the fact that he was making 20 to 25% more than me, and he wasn't any smarter, he actually graduated below me in the rankings, I started to think about, like, all right, like, I don't want to be making 43 grand 10 years from now. So what's the arc? Like, where am I going? And I bumped into that kid 6 or 7 years later, and he went from making 60 to 65. And I went from making 40, I think 43 was my total comp package with a 38 base, to well over 100. I think I was over 200 grand. And I had stock options and I was a vice president. So what I had was a lower starting, but a much higher ceiling because of where I chose to go work. So to me, the starting salary doesn't mean a crap if you pick the right place. Now, again, if you go to McDonald's, you're only going to make so much. But if you go somewhere with a horizon in front of you with growth, that gives you the ability to really grow.
So I think I'll just add one piece to that because I think it's fantastic. you went to a place where the growth opportunities were much better than that person did. And typically a smaller company is going to have to pay you a little more because what else do you have to compete against? If you're a small business, a tech business with 10 people and not a ton of growth opportunities right away, and you work across street from Salesforce, you kind of got to throw some money at them to get them to come work for you. You don't have a brand, they don't know who the hell you are. It's a lot of risk.
And the questions I didn't ask him, Ian, is, are you getting 401k? Do you have health insurance? He probably wasn't getting any of those things. So it's probably his 60s, probably really like 54 or 50.
So the growth opportunity in the company is a bigger deal than the starting salary. But I'd also say this, what will that company be perceived as in your background? So for me, General Electric was not the highest offer I got out of college, but there was no way I wasn't taking it because I was starting on their leadership program. At the time, it was vaunted. It was thought of as the number one leadership program in the country. And I knew that it was a company that the perception was GE developed good leaders. So I knew if I went there and I could earn a management job, I could leverage that to something that paid a lot more for a company that wasn't as sophisticated. And that's exactly what happened. I went to a company that was not that sophisticated when it came to training and developing leaders. And I leveraged the perception that General Electric was good at it. And they were good at it. It wasn't just a perception, it was real under Jack Welch. And that mattered a lot more for me going to the next company than what my starting salary was. I ended up making multiples of that salary by having General Electric on my resume.
So I got a degree. We kind of had different launch points with this. And I think it's worth belaboring it for this reason. When I left my major, I went to work for a home builder, and that was kind of frowned upon. It was almost the opposite of leaving an engineering degree and going to work with GE. It was very much like, you're going into residential. Like it was scoffed at by my professors and almost everyone in my class. But what I looked at was 3, 5, and 10 years later. And I knew that instead of having the ability to build a monument, I was going to have 5 different skills. I was going to know how to build a home. I was going to know how to estimate a home, sell a home, and then manage all of that. That's 5 different skills. That was going to give me a tool belt that they weren't going to have. And in addition to that, this was my decision for me. I thought it served me the best. So you have to look at it of, this is the orchestra that I'm going to play. I need to pick the right instruments. And your instrument was, I went to a great company. I can leverage that. For me, it's, I've got these different skills that I can use to leverage.
Yeah, that's awesome. And really to think about any company that you work for, you should always think about it as, what am I getting out of it? Period. Period. There's no what's the company get first. It is always you first, because the company will put itself first over you always. You always have to think, what skills will I take away? How will this make me more valuable? And then if you want to go start a business, you can. So Frank talked about 5 big skills he had. He used it to leverage and build a business. I used it to go leverage myself some equity in a company in a very big position right out of the gate. But I thought about it in terms of, how many skills will I learn that I can go then transfer to a place with much bigger upside?
Yep. Some of this stuff you kind of look into and you kind of figure it out, and you put a better talk track around it when you're older. And you kind of do. Like I'm way more articulate about what I did in my 20s and my 30s than I was while I was living it. But if you're conscious of what's happening, you're paying attention to it, and you're making sure you do realize, like, I need to add value with the company, but I also have to look out for me. And if you do that, and it's going to get you further, and no one's going to look out for you more than you.
Well said. Number 5, you can be anyone you want to be. So this one's going to be hard for us to rip on, because it's the American dream, and it's aspirational. We tell our kids all of that kind of stuff. The reason why, I'll be interested to hear why you don't like this, but I think the reason why I don't like it is there's a lot of survivorship bias in this. And survivorship bias is just finding someone who went against all odds to do something incredible. So Oprah Winfrey is a good example, just had a really terrible, tough childhood. Tony Robbins, a lot of those kind of people where you say you can be whatever you want to be. What it misses are the millions of people that started in the same place, that took a lot of the same chances, and just for whatever reason didn't have the same luck, the same fortune. Because someone like Oprah, someone like Tony Robbins, as incredible as those people are, they'll tell you they had a lot of lucky breaks. You and I, Frank, had a lot of lucky breaks along the way. We made some good decisions, but we also found some things kind of landed in front of us that made it a little bit easier. So the reason this advice can be hard is it can make people feel like failures if they don't wind up with that kind of same success that someone might have just had a lot of luck in getting to.
So I'm going to go a slightly different direction with this. And I'm going to say, I do think you can be anything you want to be, but you got to take a lot of small steps to get there. And there is luck, there is fortune. You and I are both men, we're both white, we're both born in America. Like Warren Buffett uses those same statistics and said that's a lottery ticket. And it is. Like I know that. But if you're 20 and you want to be me, like there's a lot that went into getting here. And I think what people overlook is the amount of grueling work it takes and the grind it takes to get there. Now you need to work your ass off. You need to be relatively intelligent. You need to pick the right market. In addition to that, you need to do it for a long time. Like if you use a sports example or a business example or anything else, there are rarely overnight successes. And there's a quote that's loosely interpreted to show me, I think it's work hard, put in 10 years, have good fortune at your back, and 10 years later, people tell you you're an overnight success. And that's kind of what it felt like for me. Like 10 years after I quit my job, like it looked a lot different than it did 10 years earlier, but it took a very long time to get there.
I think the only way I would summarize that is you can be anything you want to be if you make hundreds of incredibly intelligent decisions, eat a lot of shit, and work a ton of hours. And people don't add that piece to it. And when you hear it that way, you're like, maybe I don't want to be that. How many people write, I want to be the CEO of my company when they start in that company? I want to be the CEO of Microsoft on your first day of Microsoft. And after a few years perspective, you're like, no chance I want that job. That sounds awful. The price is not worth, it's not worth the benefits of that.
I'm going to use two quotes to wrap this up. Number one is this: opportunity is often missed because it's dressed in work boots and overalls. Warren Buffett. Do for 10 years what others won't and live the rest of your life the way others can't. That's it. If you're born with a silver spoon, you might be able to do it sooner, but for everybody else, it just takes time.
I like that. That's really good. Who was that second quote? Was that Run DMC? Who said the second quote?
First, I was going to give you credit for that one.
Okay, good enough. Good enough. I probably did say it. So number 6, focus on your work-life balance. I'm going to let you just start with that softball. It feels like a softball.
It is. I'm going to quote you on this one. You're like, when you were running really hard at NVR, you're like, I don't want to hear about your freaking work-life balance. Like, I don't care. And like, I remember being with Ian and my wife and his wife, and we were away, and Ian still had the corporate job, and we were in New York to go see Hamilton. It was around Ian's 40th birthday. And we're like, we're going to have a great time. And we started off like everything that Ian and I do. We went right to a pizza shop and we're having a great time. And Jenny was like, don't ask him that question. We're going to lose him. And what she meant was Ian's brain was going to go to work and he wasn't going to be present with us for a while. And we talked about in the last segment about grinding. That's what it is. Like work-life balance doesn't really exist. It's if you want success, it's going to bleed into this. We talked about in the Godfather podcast about how work follows rich people around all the time. The way that I'll talk about work-life balance is this. Work-life balance is a myth. It's a myth. Nobody's got it figured out. It's just a myth. But the tolerance of work-life balance is different at different places. And this is a story I've told before. You worked at GE, they required 70, 80-hour weeks. If you go to Wall Street, they require 70, 80, 100-hour weeks. Like there's only a certain number of hours in a week. If you're getting past 70, 80, there's not much time for anything else. When I was coming out of college, I went and interviewed with the company. I've told the story before, but it's relevant. They talked about work-life balance, but it was 6 o'clock on a Saturday and the office was like more than half full. And then I went to NVR up in Northern Virginia and they talked about a work-life balance. They talked about, we work really hard, but people stop at 3:30. And what I heard is there's opportunity here. Like I can go put in 100 hours to outwork these people, or I can put in 60 hours to outwork these people. I want to choose the place where 60 is a lot. And it comes down to the quote in Gulliver's Travels. In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. So if you think of how your skill set fits, where you stand out, and how you can kind of utilize that system and work for you, that's how you can get a better work-life balance. But you're going to work your ass off anywhere you go, especially if it's a publicly traded company, if you want to get anywhere.
Man, I don't have a ton to add to that. That's awesome. A quote this one is my quote. I love this one. I've said this a million times to people. Balance is a function of your ambition. And ambition kind of changes throughout your life. When you have children, your ambition changes. When you get married, your ambition changes. You're younger, your ambitions are the moon because you've got lots of time on your hand, but different things change our ambitions. Maybe, a loved one gets sick and you got to spend more time with them and that's all okay. Where I get irritated with someone that wants to talk to me about work-life balance is when their ambitions are the moon and they want to talk to me about their balance. So if you have high ambitions, you have to understand that the other talented people around you, if they work more than you and they are relatively the same talent, they are going to produce more than you.
Yep.
And if they produce more than you, any smart company is going to give them more. They're going to give them more opportunities, more promotions. They're going to give them more money. And so all a company really cares about is your production. And if you produce really well and that company grows to rely on you, then you can talk to them about your balance. Then you can ask them for some reduced hours. Then you can ask them if you
earn the right
flex schedule. You earn it because I now trust you. You're a producer, and I trust that in 30 hours of work, you could do 50 for an average person in my company. So I'm going to give you all kinds of benefit of the doubt. But if you're new, I'm not giving you any of that. I don't care about your work-life balance. So if someone asks me about work-life balance in an interview, they lose me. They lose me right away. I'm interviewing you because I have a problem in my business that I can't solve without you, and I'm willing to pay you to come in and solve that problem. And you're immediately already talking selfishly about your personal life. I don't care. I need to know, can you fill the need that I have right now? That's what we need to talk about. You figure out your own balance. And if you can do that in less hours than the average Joe, good for you. But right now I need to know, can you produce at the level I'm willing to pay you for?
Yep. And I think having a work-life balance discussion with someone at your company is an earned right. And what you need to do is you need to pay attention as a job seeker or someone joining a company about what is that balance. This is kind of reading between the lines. And if you read between the lines properly, you can utilize it to your advantage. Like I have people that work 80 hours a week and I have people who work 45. The people who work 80 get way more opportunity, but there's people who work 40, 45, like even 35 who are really good. and they still get opportunity. They may not have the growth projection of someone else, but at the same time, they're really efficient with their time. And it's not a problem for me because I don't have to go look for them. I know I can rely on them. So you have to kind of pick your spots with this.
Number 7, don't be a job hopper. So I'm going to tell a story from college on this. So I went and applied for a job in college at Carpet World in West Lafayette, Indiana.
I love when you bring up the Carpet World stories.
Carpet World story, it's my favorite. So this is a data entry job, and within like an hour, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. The job was just it was 8 hours a day of literally typing numbers into a computer as fast as you could. And so I get trained by the girl. She was another college student who was graduating soon, and so they needed to train her replacement. So I went in and she spent 6 hours training me, and it was so awful. I couldn't. It was the worst job possible for Ian Mathews. There was no social interaction. I need to talk to people. It was just sitting in air conditioning. You sat all day. There were so many better jobs for me as a part-time job for a college student. And so I left that day and I was like, I can't do this job. This is the worst. But in the back of my head, I had that advice. Don't be a job hopper. You can't leave once you've committed to someone. All those values your parents.
Don't be a quitter.
Don't be a quitter. All that stuff I had in the back of my head that my parents had taught me, that's all pretty good advice. Don't be a quitter, that kind of stuff. So the next day I'm getting ready to go to work. I think my hours were like 11 to 6 or something. That was when I was supposed to work there, whenever Carpet World opened. And Paxson is sitting there, and Paxson never had a job, and he didn't go to school either. I think he was 3 years we were at Purdue. He wasn't at school, any of it. So he's like, hey, we're trying to get a game of hockey going this afternoon. Hockey's a beer drinking game. And I'm like, man, that sounds good. But I got Carpet World. And he's like, what the hell are you doing that for? I'm like, I hate it, but I can't call this manager and say I quit. And he goes, what if I do it for you? And I'm like, I mean, I can't have you do that. That's not, I got more integrity than that. He's like, no, you don't. It's Carpet World. What are they going to do? Come find you? They're going to arrest you? What are they going to do? And I'm like, I really am dreading it. I'd like to play hockey instead. So Paxson looks up the number, because I won't tell it to him. He looks up the number, calls, asks for the manager, says, this is Ian Mathews. I don't think I can do it anymore. She's like, what do you mean you can't do it anymore? We trained you. He's like, it's not for me. Carpet World's not for me. And he goes, is that okay? And she goes, no, it's not okay. We spent a day training you, put you through 2 weeks of, get you through your orientation. And he's like, I'm sorry, I can't do it. And hangs up, quits for me. It was the greatest moment of relief of my life that I didn't like. I was ready without Jeff Paxson. I was ready to work there for an entire semester because of the guilt I felt. And it's the smartest thing I ever did. It wasn't on my resume. I didn't put it on there. No one knew. I got a W-2 that year for 6 hours worked at Carpet World. But if you hate a job, and you normally know on day one, a lot of people know on day one when they walked in, I made a terrible mistake. They're not ready for me. They're unorganized. People seem unhappy here. This is a mess. You can leave. You can leave after a day, after a week, after a month. Once you've realized this is terrible for me and I hate it, you won't be punished for it the rest of your life. And in fact, I would argue the sooner you can get back into your job search, do it. Don't even put it on your resume. It doesn't matter. Just make it seem like there was a little more gap. You can be a job hopper. It's okay. Now, don't do it. Don't leave every time things are a little difficult in the company. But if you're somewhere where it's just untenable, get the hell out.
I think there's a lot. We've talked a lot in this podcast about, like you used the example about leaving GE and moving to NVR, and how one was a growing company, one was kind of a dying company. And the Dow stocks are interchangeable. They change. I think don't be a job hopper is advice from an old era. I think with technology, I think with gigs in the gig economy, I think I can summarize this with 2 quick kind of takeaways. If you have a one-day job, I don't even put that on your resume. I leave that off. But if you have something when maybe you were there for a handful of months and it's hard to fudge the gap, have a good story. Say why. Tell your manager, look, I showed up. They weren't ready. Someone cursed me out. This bad thing happened. This wasn't right. I got into the job and it wasn't what they told me. And have a real reason. And I left and I did this, or I'm looking for this. That is actionable. That is not, I didn't think I was a great fit there for these reasons, and that was different, and I went to do this. You then go from a job hopper to someone who is discretionary. You go from a cautionary tale in an interview to someone who controls your narrative. I want someone who controls their narrative. I want someone who wants to be passionate about what they're doing and inside of the company. That is how you turn a negative into a positive with a job hop.
Yeah. And look, Frank and I in 40 years combined worked for a grand total of 2 companies. So I had 2 companies on my resume. Frank had 1 before he started his own business. So we're not saying we jumped all over the place.
Left that out back. I had 2.
Yeah, but I don't necessarily care if you've job hopped a little bit. The managers that care about that want people that are scared and loyal and will stay in one place forever, no matter how much shit they feed them. That's the kind of things that they're thinking is, let me get someone who can put up with a lot of crap.
Yep.
That's the person who cares about that. I'd rather someone who has the guts to say, I don't want to work in corporate world. I want something better.
Yeah. I think we've done it. I think if you do have jumps on your resume, have a reason for it. I was fired because I was drunk. I didn't show up. Jeff Paxton called me in sick. Like, those aren't good reason to be hoppers. But if you're a hopper because it's not right and you can show there's some smarts behind this and some strategy, that's sellable.
That was a really fun game of hockey that day, though, Frank. You should have been there. Should have been there. It was good. So I really like this next one. Let your results speak for themselves. I'll let you go ahead and start on why this is bad advice.
You do it. You're passionate. Go.
So the bigger the company, the less this is going to work. If your assumption is I'm going to show up, do my job to the best of my ability every day, and everyone in this company is going to recognize me for it, and I trust my company is going to be all over this, you're just going to be disappointed, because your job, it's your career to manage. As a person, it's your career to manage. And you're giving too much credit for your managers. Managers are busy, they're stressed, they've got other things they're thinking about. They might not know all the stuff you're doing behind the scenes. You might be mentoring 3 or 4 people in the office and your manager doesn't even see it. You might be facing bigger obstacles than everyone else. An executive might not see that your numbers are a little lower because your direct manager keeps putting you over the worst challenges in the office and not saying anything about it to cover it up. It's your job to market your accomplishments. It's your job. It's no one else's, not your boss, not your boss's boss. It is not your company's job to go find everything. When you get your opportunity to explain what you're doing well, you need to explain it, and you need to do it objectively that states exactly what you're doing for your company. You have to market yourself. Your results won't speak for themselves, because someone else who is also getting results but is a great marketer of themselves is going to fly up the chain. Period.
So why don't we do this different than normal? I usually just tell you my thoughts. Why don't I kind of interview you for a second? So what does that look like? What does a good marketer look like?
So there's a difference here, because I think some people listen to this thinking, that's not me. I can't brag. I can't brag about it. So you get an opportunity every year in an annual appraisal, but you get other opportunities to do it where you can share with your manager, here's something I'm working on. I'm not sure if you know this, but here's something that's going well with someone that I've been working with. And it's not once a year. It is always. You always have to be explaining things that you are doing that are productive in the company. And a way that I like to do it always in my career is I would explain the progress I've made so far and then tell my manager where I'm stuck. So I get you 80% there to see what I'm producing for you, and I'm stuck here and I need your help. So it's an excuse to toot your horn a little bit, but it's also an admission that I know where I'm not doing well and where I need help. And the more of that you can do, the more that visibility you can show, the more your career is going to grow.
So when do you do that? Like clearly in an annual review, clearly if you have your opportunity to interview, but when else? Like how do you do this practically?
So what's shocking to me a lot of times is the number of opportunities people let pass them by to present, to be on a team, you kind of always know what the company's initiatives are. It's not hard to go ask your manager, can I get in the middle of that somehow? Is there a way that I can get into this process to figure this out? A company can only really have 4 or 5 initiatives at one given time, and anyone in the company can go put their nose into the middle of it. Hey, I have some thoughts on this. I have some thoughts that I've been working on that might help that initiative along. It doesn't take a lot of emotional intelligence to figure out what the executives are excited about in your company. Go get yourself in the middle of some team that's working on something, or go present something that might further that initiative along a little bit. And it touts the fact that you're a thinker, that you're creative, that you're not just a drone worker on the front lines, that you can shake things up a little bit. All of that shows your results, and it shows your creativity, and that you're a person that cares and could be trusted with more responsibility in your organization.
So here's where it worked well for me. And I think the first thing you must know when it's the advice is let your results speak for themselves. First of all, you need to have results. Like if you're not doing good at the job, if you're 27 on a 32 and you're doing other stuff, like my advice to you is go back and do the damn job you're supposed to do first. But think about this, being proactive. So 2 things I did in my career early is I saw that someone was getting married, and I went up to him and said, hey, you're getting married in a couple of weeks. Who's covering your community? And he had an assistant, but the assistant was kind of lower on the totem pole. I'm like, what are the critical events? And I volunteered to help him before anyone asked. People noticed that.
Yeah.
I went into the back office. I realized that we were going over budget on some stuff, not just me personally, but our whole division. And I went into the back office and I sat with the costing department. And I figured out why. And I got into it. Nobody asked. And then I just kind of brought it up in a meeting, and they're like, how the hell do you know that? You've been here 8 months. I'm like, well, I went in on, Thursday afternoon, and I sat down with Bernie and I went through it. And they're like, and then another thing I did is I went and got into a model. I asked the lady who was selling in the homes, I was like, can I just come in on a weekend? And she's like, did anyone ask you to do that? I was like, no. I'm like, what do I have to wear? And she told me, and I'm like, okay, I'm a young kid out of college. Like, I don't really have a lot of nice stuff. Like, can I wear a suit? And she's like, sure. I'm like, I won't be in the way. If I'm in the way, just tell me, I'll get out of the way. And she was like, no problem. Like, I didn't ask my boss. I wanted to learn. And because I wanted to do those things, like, it's amazing how like years later, people brought up those examples to me of things that I had done just to get better. So
Love it.
And that's how you start crafting a narrative. And then when you get in the interview, you talk about what you did and how you did it. But those are little things that I did.
I'm going to give you one more example, and then we'll move on to the next one. I think it was like my second year of sales, Frank. I went from something like $300,000 of orders to 4 million. And that was great, huge percentage increase, 10x. And, but if you looked at 4 million, I was, I think the average salesperson was doing like 5 million. So it wasn't terribly impressive. The number wasn't terribly impressive. Like if you just laid out all the salespeople, I wasn't last. I was probably in like the 40th percentile, maybe. But one thing I did, when you signed up I had to do it with all new customers, obviously. And we didn't get a lot of new customers in our region, the Midwest region, maybe had like 20 sales guys. But most guys were farmers. They were getting their orders from the same customers they've had for 20 years. But you could see in our software when a customer had been entered into the software for the first time that year. So I went back and I looked in 2002 or whatever year it was, 2001. And I looked at how many new accounts that were entered into the software under my name. And it was like 50 small orders. But then I went and I figured out how to search it in the region. And in the region, it was like 110. So like out of 20 sales guys, I had 50% of the brand new customers that were created. No one knew this stat. No one knew any of this, but I went and I shared it with my boss. I shared this 50 out of 110 or something like that. That got to his boss, which got to an even bigger boss. And it got to a vice president who at our annual meeting said, we only signed up 110 new customers in the Midwest and one rep did 50% of it. He used my stat that I did all the homework on in that, and he knew my name because I did it and he mentioned me by name. And the point he was making is everyone else needs to prospect. If this guy can go out and get all those new customers, why isn't everyone else prospecting? He used it as a way to motivate the rest, but my name was very much known because I shared a stat that no one else had ever even heard of.
And you and I have talked about how you were known as the prospect guy for a while because of that. So
I got branded that. I got branded that.
To wrap up this point, let your results speak for themselves also needs to be kind of talked about as have an elevator pitch. We'll get into this more at another time, but like if you ask me what I do, I know exactly what it is. I drop several like hints and tips and tricks about what I've done and how I've done it.
Yeah.
And if you care at all about what I do, I give you a couple of Easter eggs that you can uncover and you can come back to me with questions. And that's what Ian's saying in your career. Understand how to very briefly, in a couple of sound bites, distinguish yourself or have others think you're memorable because of what you say.
Love it. Number 9, play the game. Frankie, you take this one start.
Yeah, I think we just talked about it. Playing the game the wrong way is, it can be said a bunch of different things. But if you really play the game right, what you do is you work hard, you add value, and then what you do is you develop your own talk track. And if you do those things, you can control the narrative. Playing the game is not being an ass kisser. It is not being a brown noser. Like when I got to Ryan Holmes when I was 23 years old, I remember hearing, I don't even know who this guy was. He was gone before I got there, but they're like, you can't tell where his head ends and the other guy's ass starts. Like, I never want anyone to do that or say that about me. What I wanted them to say about me is he's a hard worker, he's smart, he's proactive. And if you know Ian or me, we're both pains in the asses. We're not ass kisses. But what we are is we're reliable and we're people who also break other people's balls. And because of that, you have to earn this. You can't do this at your first day on the job, but 5 years into the job, you're the guy who holds people accountable. You're the one who goes, you're being kind of a pain in the ass, boss. You can do those things and you can do it your own way. And you find that your voice is fresh. You're not just regurgitating all the crap that other people are talking about. Instead, you've got the chops, you have the ability, you have the knowledge, and you say something contrarian, and it's like, that's interesting. That isn't playing the game. That's being unique, but being really good when you're being unique.
I think the people that that irritate me in business are the ones that play the game to make up for the fact that they can't get results.
Correct.
Those people irritate me. So
right.
I played the game. I figured out, what is my company reward? What does it recognize? What does it reward? What does it pay for? Both companies, I did that. Who do they promote? What are those people involved in? And so at GE, you had to be involved in Jack Welch's big initiatives. You had to care about Six Sigma. You had to care about globalization. You had to care about getting sales through the internet. Those are things that were important at the time to him. I was on it. Those are his initiatives. I'm not going to poo-poo them. I'm not going to say bad things about them. If a guy that smart is saying those things are important, damn right, I'm going to go invest in them, and I'm going to be a champion for those things. I'm going to use them to get results. I'm not going to use them to make up for the fact I don't get results. And so that's the tweak I would say on that is, don't play the game because you suck at your job. Use what the company is interested in. That's how you play the game to go get results. Buy in.
Fit in, add value, but be enough difference where you don't sound like an ass kiss or just someone who's just humming along with everybody else. You can be a contrarian if you earn it, but you can't be a contrarian to a point where you're a turncoat. You got to be rowing in the same direction as everybody else.
Yeah, I 100% was a pain in the ass for every boss I ever had, 100%. But I had results, and I could be a pain in the ass. I could say
You're a
this is
pain
a
in the
dumb
ass
idea.
when he's the co-host. I mean, let's be honest.
100%, but I'm getting results. There's no doubt people are tuning in to hear this sweet, sweet, sweet voice of mine. There's no doubt about it.
All right, stand up for what you believe in. Let's go.
Number 10, the final one. Let's take us home, Frankie.
So we almost called this snitches or bitches, but we put in here instead, stand up for what you believe in.
When you say we, you mean you almost called it that.
So what we mean by this is it's kind of playing the game as part of it, right? It's you need to have a backbone and a spine, but you also need to fit in. And if you're someone who's just so far on the periphery because you march to your own drum, you're not going to fit in with the corporate culture. And there are certain things that I think you need to go along with, and there are certain things you don't. So I'll use two quick examples. And Ian and I talk about these a lot. Like Solomon Brothers or Wells Fargo were both doing things at their companies that were bad. They were very bad. But what happened is the management kind of rooted it out and came from the top down. The people who are often the snitches are often the people who, from the bottom up, history does not look terribly favorably upon them, because what you're doing is you're selling out your management. So there's a right way to do this and there's a wrong way. Standing up for what you believe in, if something is ethical or screwed up and it's small, you need to have a conversation behind closed doors with someone else so someone isn't embarrassed. And you need to make sure of that. And if you're working at the right company, if someone comes up to me and says, Frank, someone here this isn't working right, or they did this to somebody else, I get all the information. I make sure I understand it. I make sure there's not an axe being grind. And then what I do is I go dig into it and we go fix it. But that is very different than someone who's constantly on our team calls railing against us. So you need to make it actionable, and you need to do so discreetly, and you need to do so respectfully. But if you're constantly the person who's calling the 800 number to report that so-and-so is doing something wrong, your career is not going to age well.
If your company is opening erroneous bank accounts, raise your hand, right? That's one thing. If you don't like policies, initiatives, processes, I think the person who drives everyone nuts in a company is the one who is constantly telling you how they did it different at their last company. No one ever wants to hear that. That's not how we did it at Bank of America. That's not how we did it at US Bank. That's not how we did it at Pulte Homes. No one gives a shit how you did it there. Why did you leave then? If it was so great, that's my take always when I hear someone constantly beating me about how it was done better somewhere else. It's like, why did you leave? Yeah. Sounds like you loved it. Did they fire you? Like, why are we always talking about someone else? This is how we do it here. There are certain hills to die on, and there are certain hills you just pass on and leave. So standing up for what you believe in all the time really just annoys most people in your company.
Yep. I think you got to, so I think as we wrap up standing up for you believe in, it kind of fits with the rest of this. These are bad career advices or points or kind of bullets, but you got to pick your spots with all of this stuff. And there's not one answer for any of it. If something morally and ethically is happening that's not right at your company, that might be the time where you should be a job jumper and you should talk about it. But these things all kind of play together. But what I want to wrap up with is this, Ian. It's, you need to make the best decisions for you. You need to figure out what arc and what path you want to go on, and you need to be the person who is responsible for that. Results win out over nearly everything else, but don't also look away from the fact that you need to do some level of self-promotion, or you're never going to go very far.
I mean, just an incredibly intelligent, coherent wrap up. I'm proud of you, man. You're getting better at this every week. You really are. Really are. I'm really proud of you, Frank.
Now I need to go pee.
So we are wrapping up. And if you've stayed with us this long, you obviously think our content is somewhat decent. If you've not given us a nice write-up and a 5-star review, Please give us that 5-star review. If you haven't subscribed, please do it. Thank you so much. We appreciate all of you for listening. Frankie, go take your leak.
Ian, it was great to see you.
Great to see you, bro.
Just when I think you couldn't possibly be any dumber, you go and do something like this. And totally redeem yourself!
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it.